today to our 5 manager missteps that sabotage probation and performance management conversations and 5 techniques to overcome them in virtual boardroom. It's been facilitated by HR Recruit and Vicky Roberts. My name's Jo Thompson and I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by Vicky, who will introduce herself shortly. Vicky will explore 5 key missteps that we see managers making when managing performance in a probation period, explore why they happen, and unpack techniques that will overcome them that you can use with your managers. If you've got any questions during the session, please put them into the chat box facility and we will cover them as we go along. I'm now going to hand you over to Vicky, who will introduce herself and start the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo, and it's such a pleasure to see everybody this afternoon. Welcome, and thank you for spending a valuable hour with me looking at this topic. As Jo says, I'm Vicky Roberts, and I'm the Managing Director of Lead ER. I have spent over a decade leading a learning and development consultancy that supports organisations to develop their leaders and managers on all things people management and development, with a real focus on what you might describe as the tougher end, the ER conversations that our managers need to have. I'm an employment lawyer by background. I spent a number of years what you might describe as normal lawyering. So whether that's advising on change or dealing with tribunals or dealing with corporate transactions, I've spent my years doing it. And what's really stood out for me is that our line managers are key for these things to go well. And so that's why Jo and I put this particular webinar together, because I'm very conscious that there has been so much work been going on to get ready for the change in the qualifying period and all the changes that are needed to the probation processes. But managers make the difference in terms of bringing those policies and procedures alive. One of the lovely things about my job is that I spend an awful lot of time in lots of organisations, and there are some common themes, which are these 5 missteps that I see managers do, and I'd be really keen to hear your thoughts as we go. As Jo said, this is meant to be interactive. I know we've got a large audience, but please feel free to share your thoughts and experiences. Often on these things we learn as much from each other than we do from the nominated speaker, so please do share your thoughts as we're going along. But for my contribution, I'm going to share some of those missteps that I can see that go along the way, and how to overcome them. So this is going to be quite quick fire, go through the 5 and then go through the techniques, but don't let that stop you. And popping thoughts on the chat would be so useful, and I have reserved a little bit of time at the end to pick up any questions that I don't capture along the way, to make sure that we cover everything that you have to say. And I've already seen one comment here. Thank you. An employee with non-disability absence during the probation. And questions around unreliability due to absence. It could be persistent or long-term absence. I think this goes to the nub of the issue here around the quality of decision making when we're bringing probation periods to an end, bringing employment to an end after a probation period. And this is really what I see as being the benefit of some of these tools and techniques that I'm going to share. So let's get started, and we'll have a look at the 5 missteps that I've captured. The comparison trap is the first one. So this is where the manager is saying they are not as good as Jo, and they get caught in that sense of the comparison of describing that this new hire just isn't as good as Jo. That's one. Hire a guilt is the other one. And what I mean by that is managers have spent a long time making good decisions in terms of selecting somebody. They have advocated for them. They spent quite a lot of time preparing for them. But then when they start and they spot perhaps a gap in the expected performance in that probation period, they feel guilty that they almost look inauthentic if they're suddenly starting to acknowledge that this person isn't delivering. Skipping the diagnostic when it comes to managing underperformance. And this, I think, links a little bit to the question that's gone on the chat already. What's the underlying cause of the underperformance that's going on here? And what does that mean in terms of how do we handle it? And that often comes from the fact that managers will make up some assumptions around why somebody isn't delivering performance rather than kind of digging in. And a short time frame doesn't help with that, doing that diagnostic. So all of these things can have a bit of a cumulative effect. This is the controversial one, my fourth one, the SMART objectives. I'm not saying I don't like SMART, but I think how they're used, particularly early on, can create some challenges. So I've got a technique to look at how we can make SMART even more effective for us, particularly in a probationary period situation. And last but by no means least, the fear of a bullying allegation. Now, as you've been listening to me walking through each of these, you'll have reached thoughts. So do pop on the chat. Is there any one of these that's really standing out for you to say, do you know what, that's an issue in my organisation? Pop something on the chat if there is. No worry, Carl. No, lovely to see you. Yeah, thank you, Diane. Smart. Yeah. Hire a guilt, yeah, and how long to let them the bed in, yeah, okay, lovely. Hire a guilt and skipping the diagnostic. These two are jumping out already. Lovely. Okay, so let's skipping the diagnosis. Yeah, Teresa, thank you. Yeah, lovely. All right, let's have a look at all of these then. So in terms of an overarching kind of tool that I find is a real game changer when it comes to managing performance, whether it's in the probationary period or more day to day, I call it the success cycle. You'll know it as the performance management cycle. It's pretty standard fare, this, I guess. But I find if you share with managers that whether you are managing in the probationary period, whether you are managing underperformance, whether you're dealing with something formally through your performance management process, each step is essentially one run around the cycle. And what this really helps to do is keep the conversations moving. So, if we just look at a probationary conversation, first of all, your wants around that cycle. And then again, if you're spotting that somebody needs some support in that probationary period, and if you've got a fairly standard kind of underperformance management process that's got warnings in it, each step in the formal stage wants one run around this cycle. And what we've got here is some of the challenges are very easily mapped against this cycle. So the first one that we talked about, the comparison gap, for me, that's about how a manager identifies and describes a performance gap. In terms of the hire a guilt, I think that sits in the middle between describing the gap in the first place, but also beginning to think about what the diagnosis of that gap might be. Skipping the diagnostic, that's all around the good old diagnosis, the second step of the gap, which is the all important thing for me before we then start putting into PIPs or action plans, that sort of thing. And I know there's quite a number of comments about skipping the diagnostic. Your SMART objectives obviously sit in the third stage, which is planning the support and the time to improve. And then the one that is the fear of a bullying allegation, for me, sits dead in the centre. If someone is following this cycle around and taking each of these steps, then it's going to be quite challenging for a team member to be able to fulfill an allegation that bullying has occurred. They might feel it, there might be an emotional reaction to it, but substantively, in terms of any evidence of bullying, it just isn't going to be there. So the technique that I'm going to share with you around the fear of a bullying allegation is all about giving that manager confidence in their right to manage performance. So let's have a look at the comparison trap. How do we overcome that comparison trap? So as I said, the comparison trap is them saying, look, they're just not as good as Joe. And the person that might be the predecessor in the role, it might be a team member who's a peer, doesn't matter. It's all about doing the comparison. What I found is this 4 box grid can make such a difference in really isolating, and I know it sounds like daft, but depersonalizing what the performance issue actually is. And as you can see, we've got 2 axes here. The what's of the role, so that's the deliverables, the outputs, the expectations in terms of what the team member is delivering. And then on the horizontal axis, on the vertical axis, you've got the hows of the role. So that's the behaviours, and you could align that to values or key behavioural metrics that you have that are linked to those values. And what I tend to find is if you say to a manager, okay, so plot where Vicky is first on the easier of the 2 axes, so on the horizontal first, where are they? And use the middle line of each axis as acceptable performance. And what this really forces is a manager to use their right to manage to say, what is okay for this individual in terms of delivery? And of course, what you end up with is 4 quadrants. Your top performers are acceptable and above on both axes. So you're in your top right. The opposite then is your underperformance up to the left of acceptable performance on both axes. And then you've got the trickier 2, which is smashing it in terms of the what's of the role, but their behaviours aren't really where they need to be. And that's often, you can see a really high performer in terms of outputs, but their behaviours are causing chaos in the team or, not engaging with stakeholders or whatever it might be. And then on this axis is, they are delivering well in terms of the behaviours, but they're just not delivering what they need to deliver. And depersonalizing like that can help to come away from a comparison, say, actually, I can see exactly what the issue is here, which then helps you to help your manager actually describe what the performance gap is. So the second technique is a good old feedback model, and you may well have your own, or you might recognize the features of this one, but the one I use is WIF. And the idea is that feedback is meant to stay in the long-term memory, which is, of course, allied very closely to our social brain. So we need to do it in a way that really encourages and appeals to that social brain. And keeping it factual and describing the impact will help to calm down fight or flight brains, which then helps to make sure that the learning really embeds. So what WIF stands for is what you've seen or heard, what the impact of that is, or what's needed and then what's needed for the future. And what this helps is to focus on the problem, if you like, and not the person. And so using it in conjunction with the 4 box grid then helps them to really describe exactly what the performance gap is for this individual, and therefore who they're comparing to then begins to fade into the background as a result of that. So that's the first couple of techniques that are useful for the comparison trap. Let me go to higher guilt. And I've cheated a bit because it's the 4 box grid again, but there are 5 techniques that I'm going to share, honestly. So this is where I think that time frame comes in. And I'd be really keen to hear your thoughts in terms of where do line managers typically hire into in terms of when they make the offer? Are they, for example, the full package? They hired somebody and they are fully kind of developed in both the what's and the hows of the role. Or are they great fit behaviourally, but there's some knowledge or skills gaps? Or are they bottom right, so technically sound, but behaviours need work in order to align to who we are, our culture, that sort of thing? Or, and I have heard this more than once, they're better than no one. So tell me on the chat with your experiences. Tell me where it is on the 4-box grid, and I'm just going to have a look at top left usually. Carl, thank you. Yeah, lovely. Yeah, get it. Absolutely right. Bottom right for Uniqlo. That's interesting. Yeah, top left and right. Okay, Debbie. Yeah, that makes sense. So there's a common theme here that we recruit on the basis of potential, don't we? To see people as being a good fit, but we know that there's knowledge and skills gap. And I think this is where the hire a guilt really comes in, because actually this person spotted that they're a good fit. They've talked about them in glowing terms, the line manager. Often if there's been a bit of a delay because of the notice period as to how they're being recruited, the fact that they aren't at top right gets almost forgotten. Yeah, interesting point that you make, Darren, actually, that smaller organizations tend to kind of hold up for the full package because they've arguably got, less resources to be able to deal with this. I think that makes absolute sense. And then the question here around hire a guilt is that they thought that they are right, but actually then there's work to do. And so the hire a guilt thing for me is about getting a manager to overcome, look, they thought that they were the right thing, but actually let's go back to the point of hiring. Where were they on this quadrant? And let's remember what we identified we needed to do in order to get them to top right. So this grid is so useful to say, okay, at the point of offer, where were they in your mind? And then the so what of that is, okay, so what do we need to do to get them to top right if, let's assume, as per the majority, they have sort of almost forgotten that they need to do some work to get them to that top right. And it overcomes that guilt because it's still validating their decision that they were the right person, but we know we've got work to do. Now they're in role to get them towards top right.
Vicky, sorry to interrupt. Diane asked a question just a couple of minutes ago about whiff and
right.
Said, how does it work with hearsay?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So by hearsay, I'll just whip back a second. What by hearsay, I think what we mean here is somebody else has heard that the performance is not where it needs to be, and that can be the case with remote teams, that sort of thing. So I think the key here is using whiff twice. So the person that's telling you about it, use it as a questioning format to say, okay, so what are you seeing or hearing, Joe, about Vicky's performance that I need to give feedback, and what's the impact of that, and what do you need them to do differently? The line manager is therefore enabling the conversation. Now, ideally, I think if the manager can become almost like an intermediary so that the conversation is being had three-way, I think that's helpful. But if it's, say, a customer or something like that, then that might be difficult. But use whiff as a probing tool to be able to say, okay, so you're saying Vicky is not doing this aspect of her role well. What exactly have you seen or heard, Joe? Describe it specifically so that the manager can then give that feedback back and explore it. So why is it that person's seeing that? What's going on? So you can actually start to explore the relationship with the person who is providing you that information. So you're using whiff in two different ways. Great catch, Joe. Thank you ever so much. And a great question. Thank you too.
Louis just put another one on, Vicky. Just
before,
you move on. I think just leading to the four quadrant. Did you want me to read it, or can you see that?
Yeah, I've got it. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, no, that's a great spot. Thank you. Guilt in responsibility leading to a gap between expectations on training benchmarked against others. Yeah, excelling with similar levels of training, and a new hire not responding to similar levels with others have progressed with that issue. Yeah, I think that's actually a really interesting combo of hire a guilt and the comparison trap, because actually there is something there around really being clear as to what the expectations were at the point of hiring, but also then somebody doing a comparison to say, well, Vicky's getting on all right with it, why isn't Frida, sort of type thing. And comparisons aren't helpful here. And this takes me quite nicely on to the next technique that I wanted to explore, which is missing the diagnostic. Because actually in that situation where you've got the difference in expectations and a comparison, what we're not doing is getting underneath the underlying cause of what is going on in terms of that performance. Yeah, Carl, I agree with you. Too much halo effect when comparing with peers. I completely agree with you. And that halo can then be reinforced a bit by higher guilt as well, in terms of they've given them this halo, they've gone out, they've advocated for them, they've talked about them to their stakeholders, to their peers, to their team. This person's going to be brilliant. And then actually shifting from that position is quite difficult when we've embedded something ourselves. But doing it early is all the more important, as we know now, because we haven't got the 2 years to play with like we used to have. Both really good points. I hope, Louise, I've got the gist of that point, but if I haven't and there's a bit I've missed, then do come back onto the chat for me. So let me go on to the third misstep then, and the third technique, which is skipping the diagnostic. I've just alluded to it a little while ago around actually really getting to the underlying cause of why there is a performance gap. And this technique I've found so useful for managers to really kind of almost eat the elephant as to what the cause of the underperformance is. And it's whether it's a what gap, a why gap, or a how to gap. And the point about this is your solution that you're going to put into place is different depending upon what the cause of the gap is. Now, what gaps are the ones that you think, yeah, come on, they don't exist. But sometimes, particularly when you've got a new hire, understanding what's expected in the role and giving that clarity of direction can get missed quicker than we think, particularly now when we've got a 5 month window. Managers kind of forget quite how much corporate knowledge they've got, particularly if they are managers that have grown through the ranks, as it were. They forget to set that expectation. And a very quick war story from my past was that I once dealt with a performance dismissal of someone who had gone all the way through a formal process for not doing a monthly report. Only when the case kind of got through the tribunal system did it become apparent that this particular individual had no idea what this report was used for, so wasn't prioritizing it, so wasn't sort of seeing it as important because they didn't know what was happening to it. And it's a very stark example and pretty unusual, I accept, but it really reinforced for me sometimes what gaps can sneak up on us. And if the other thing, of course, where this can pop up is around change. If there's been change in an organisation, kind of clarifying that this is something that they need to do. The why gaps are where somebody is lacking in confidence or not prioritising something. So this is not a training issue necessarily. This is about building confidence and overcoming these things that we all hate doing in our roles, making sure that they've got the right level of priority. And how-to gaps are the ones that are developed by skills and knowledge. And what this stops is an automatic reaching to, we'll stick them on a training course. If we haven't identified what's going on, then it can actually really, it can mean that we're shooting off in lots of different directions in terms of an action plan or a PIP. Now, just a quick question for me. What do we call our action plans and PIPs? Is it PIP? Is it action plan? Is there something better than those? Because sometimes, as I say, we learn better from each other on these in these webinars, because language matters around this. I mean, the whole put on the PIP language really doesn't create that sense of we're in this for a conversation, does it? So performance improvement plan, I think just by using it in full helps compared to PIP. Yeah, Denise, you're with me on the PIP, but it has negative connotations. Yeah, interesting. Call it a PIP, but reference it as an action plan. I like that. I think that's a great idea. Oh, that's nice. Performance progress review, like that. That's got a real sort of sense of we're in this to help you vibe, far better than a PIP potentially. Yeah, performance improvement plan. And of course, the benefit of PIP is a lot of lot of people will know what we mean by those because it's such a prevalent language. And I do think one of the things that we're going to see societally is employees being kind of more ready to ask what's going to go on in the probationary period, whereas of course it's always been a little bit of uncertainty, hasn't it, because we've had effectively 2 years despite what a contractual probationary period might have said. Lovely. Okay, let me move us on then to once we've done a good diagnosis in terms of what's going on for someone in terms of the cause of the performance gap. How do we create a good action plan PIP using something like SMART? And the reason I say SMART is a misstep is that I think it's brilliant for critiquing an objective or a goal. I don't think it's as good for writing one. So what I often recommend to managers is that you reorder SMART to SAT. Now, it doesn't roll off the tongue anywhere near as well, unfortunately. But what it does, in the words of Simon Sinek, is start with the why. What are we looking to achieve first? And I know there's different meanings for R. So in this context, I mean R in SMART being relevant, but starting with the why are we doing it? So identifying, Vicky, we've identified that you are not delivering on this aspect of your role. And we think it's because you're lacking in confidence, given the conversations that we've had. If we improve your confidence, what we will see as a measurable output is that you will be doing it more promptly, doing it more effectively, whatever the good looks like. And so specifically, you're going to sit with Jo, who does this really well, and going to learn from her. It's achievable because Jo says she's got the capacity, and you're going to do that in the next 2 weeks. So it's all the features of SMART as we know and love it, but it's starting with the why. It's a simple shift, but it really does seem to work to kind of link it back to demonstrating why we're setting this objective. And it helps with that negative connotation of, oh, I've just been given these objectives and I don't know why. And of course, if a team member's fight or flight brain is going, you need to be all the more obvious around why you're setting an objective so that they can really see that the purpose of this is to improve. And let me move on then to my final of the 5, and then I'm going to open the floor for questions, and we can go back to any of these and sort of take a deeper dive, including some of the points that have been made in the chat up to now. Is how do you overcome a fear of a manager saying that they are going to be accused of bullying? And this is a great coaching tool that I've really seen make a difference for managers when they have that real fear of it. And I call this the 4 M's. And it's a way of walking managers through what they're doing or planning to do up to now. And the first M is about motivation. So this is saying, look, why are you looking to have that performance conversation with Vicky? Why are you looking to put her on an action plan? Is it that you're angry? Is it that you're helping them to improve? And yeah, no, of course I want them to improve. So it's almost kind of anchoring back. This is what you're looking to achieve. This is what your motivation is. It's also quite helpful if a manager's fight or flight brain has gone and they've got a bit cross about a situation to say, okay, what was the effect of the conversation that you had? If there was anger in play. But more often you see, of course I'm there to help Vicky improve. I've spent all this time recruiting her. Of course I want her to improve. So starting with, look, what's our motivation for this context is kind of grounding what the conversation is going to be. Then the next thing is around the message. So what are you going to say to Vicky? And what this is doing is making sure that we are focusing on the problem, the situation, and not on the person. So thinking about things like using the whiff feedback model to describe the message, rather than generalizing. You're not very good at, you are not very confident in, all of those sort of generalizations or labels that a manager knows what they mean, but of course it doesn't give them the all important information. And going back to the hearsay point that was made earlier, I think it's quite interesting when it is hearsay. Well, you're bullying me, you're using somebody else's message, you're hiding behind the customer or the more senior manager. I think the message is all the more important when it's a hearsay scenario like that. Then it's method. And I think this is really interesting because of course, we all know managers who will prefer to kind of write something out, do it by email, that sort of thing, or, have done it by text. Or sometimes where they've done it in front of others without thinking, sort of recognizing the role of the method in whether that's triggering somebody's fight or flight brain or it's going to encourage them to really be receptive is a really interesting exploration here. I think with new team members in particular, it's worthwhile sort of using this to say, okay, so where have you had the most constructive conversations? What this can really help with as well is exploring generational differences and also neurodiversity in the team member as well, in terms of how they are best communicated with. And for example, you've got in my little image here, you've got people talking one-to-one, but sometimes actually sitting side by side or walking meetings is sometimes quite useful when you've got to deliver that difficult message. So actually putting the focus on the atmosphere can really help to give managers confidence that they are going into this not just with the right message and the right motivation, they are also going into it approaching the conversation in the right way. I think your point about positioning really helps, Denise, I think is a really good one. And actually in your conversation around motivation, you can almost help managers set a scene in that sense to say, as you know, we recruited you recognizing that there was some development that was needed, almost go back to that 4-box grid at the point of hiring in that sense. If there were conversations saying you seem like a really good fit, but there we know that you don't have, I don't know, knowledge in this sector or of this particular product or whatever it might be. That positioning can really help, and therefore it sort of reassures that it's a good thing. So it's a great point, Denise. Thank you. And then the fourth M is probably the most obvious one, milestone. So that's about promptness, because of course, if there's been a delay in giving some feedback about something that's happened, in the team member's mind, there's either a sense of, well, why are you raising it now? And it can't have been that bad at the time, or you've been hanging on to this issue and you've been judging me negatively all this time. They are both going to trigger the team member's reptilian brain. So if we haven't done it promptly, how do we put that into a context and acknowledge that, there's been a delay in time, if you like, in terms of dealing with the particular issue. And it just then helps create a framework for how you're going to then have that conversation. And if you can say, look, all of those 4 M's are in place, there is positive motivation, good quality message, appropriate method for the nature of the issue and the individual, and we're dealing with this in a timely way. And of course, you've got, more than one milestone to be thinking about here. Then you can very confidently say to a manager, there isn't going to be a sustainable allegation of bullying here. If somebody does react in a fight or flight time, that's bullying, that is, then you can then go into sort of questioning to explore that fight or flight response, to then start to point out all the good things that are being done to help that person actually improve. And that will help to calm down reptilian brains in that way as well. So this has been a speedy run through of the five uh, uh, missteps and the five techniques that I find are game changers in terms of the ways to overcome them. But I'm going to open the floor for comments, observations. Please feel free. I'll just put a quick synopsis slide up here. Go for whichever it is that's grabbing you. Have you used these? Have you used something different that you'd recommend? As I say, remember that we learn from each other on these webinars. It isn't just that I've particularly got the hot seat today. Do share them as we go along. Thoughts, anyone?
If anyone
Oh,
wants to come off mute, then feel free.
lovely. Yes, good idea, Jo. Thank you. Oh, Denise, thank you. Love the models will really help to enforce objectivity. You're absolutely right. Thank you, Debbie. Are you a dog lover like me? Love the yeah. Lovely. I think it's a lab. Not sure. Think it might be a lab. Yeah, I think objectivity is going to be key, isn't it? Because now we've got what 3, 4, 5 months to be working with to be able to demonstrate that objectivity is going to be all the more important. And I think the thing for me, I've been finding with conversations I've been having with managers is, look, if you have to go over the 6 months, everything that you've done pre 6 months sets you up for success to be able to demonstrate what a fair outcome is going to look like. Diane, thank you. Yes, Jo will send you a little portal with all of the frameworks on it after the event. Slightly neater looking than slides, and there's also opportunities to get in touch with me if there's anything I can do to help, or you've got some further questions, that sort of thing. You can get access that way. So yes, absolutely, they are there. Talk to me about the 4-box grid, anyone? Yeah, thank you, Carl. Really important to lay it out at the beginning. Either on chat or please come off mute. Talk to me about the 4-box grid. Do you use this? Is there a version of this that you use as, say, a talent model, for example? And if so, what are the challenges around the hows? Denise, I'll just while people are thinking about that, I'll come to your question, Diane. Yeah. So given what's your feeling about a reasonable probation period? I think it's a really good question. That let me answer it as the most common, and please feel free to jump on the chat, everybody, to give views. What I've been seeing is between 3 and 5 month probation periods most commonly, but of course for some roles that's very short. And really what people have been doing is using that as to trigger conversations about the basics in terms of what's going on for more complex roles. If the roles are more complex, it's about doing more of the same, really, but just being confident in our right to manage in terms of making good decisions. But, reasonable, I would say, is between 3 and 5. That seems to be what the market seems to be accepting. Pleasure, no problem. Yes. 4-box grid, absolutely use it with the team member, absolutely, either in recruitment, so thinking out loud in probation reviews, absolutely, because I think what it does is help with a collaborative conversation. What you need the manager to be able to do is be confident in their right to manage in terms of explaining what acceptable performance is. And of course, that might be that you are being very specific about that, because that's a label, isn't it? So you need to be very clear about what that means. But absolutely, you can. I've seen some people rephrase acceptable to on track, something like that might feel slightly less robust, but it absolutely works. And then Claire, in terms of interviewing, yes, absolutely, getting somebody to say, okay, why are we hiring this person and what does that mean for us? Because what that can also help to do is say, look, if you've got a bunch of people in the top right already, then actually you can call on some of them to help somebody shift somebody from top left to top right. This is where you can use your existing talent. Whereas, look, in reality, in your team, you haven't got anybody top right. Can you really say you've got the capacity to take somebody else that's top left and develop them towards the top right just right now? Or should you be holding out for somebody who has got more of the full package, as it were? Absolutely, Denise. I've used it in both recruitment training for that, to say, let's be honest about who we're recruiting here. And as I say, have we got the capacity to take this on in terms of developing this individual, which of course also has the benefit of really setting up the conversation in the get-go to say, what are you going to need to do with this person when they land? Good. What about the with feedback? I know we've got some with feedback fans, and thank you for confirming it is allowed. Thank you. But what other feedback models have you used? I've often heard with described as similar to EEC, which I think it is, in terms of focusing on the kind of factual details. But please do share other feedback models that you find work really well. Yeah, and that's the thing. I think it's slightly light-hearted, and when I'm delivering training on this, what I often say is, look, feedback needs to stay in the mind in the right kind of ways. So our social brain is the home of long-term memory. It's triggered by empathy. So actually, if we can create that sense of this feedback is here to help you improve, then actually it's going to stick in the memory in the right kind of ways. It's also quite good for positive feedback as well, which again we want to stick in the mind. I often sort of talk about, you're a star is a bit like a sugar rush, whereas actually describing what they've done, what the impact is, and where they can use it even more in the future, that really does stick in mind. Any other recommendations for some feedback models for anyone? Shall I move us on then to the diagnostics? What do you see most often of the what gaps, the why gaps, or the how to gaps? Which are the ones that jump out to you as being the most prevalent? This might link back to how we were hiring. Yeah, managers don't explain clearly. No, I think that's really interesting. And why is that, do we think? Is it my suggestion that it's almost so ingrained in them they don't think to step back and explain what's expected? Is it time? What is it in people's minds?
Hello. Sometimes I think it could be that managers just think like, I want another that person,
Yeah.
or I want someone. They're not really looking at the job description,
No.
or they just say, I want another Keith or
Yes.
Sally, just picking two names at random.
Yes.
And then that's where it falls down, because HR doesn't, maybe some HR professionals don't challenge, I wouldn't say challenge, but clarify that enough, through, as I mentioned in the chat earlier, through an inquiry-based approach. What
Yeah.
is it you're looking for? How
Yeah.
are they going to do it? Why? Um,
Yeah, quite so, Carl. And it's very much a why do you need another Fred or Keith or Vicky or whoever it is? Absolutely, what is it that they're doing? And you could actually use the full box grid thinking about it for that. So tell me why they were so brilliant. What was it that they were doing, particularly around the hows, I think.
yeah.
Yeah. Denise, let's have a look at a couple of other points. An assumption on the manager's part. They've got X experience so that they know what they're doing. Absolutely right. But as we all know, that experience, it could be the same thing over and over again, couldn't it? And again, given that we're focusing on the hows of the role as being as important as the what's, actually sort of exploring that can be really important. Yeah, the why can take a while, in terms of building the confidence, understanding what the priorities are, and doing that sort of top-down communication. What's the kind of key kind of focus or mission of the organization and how that links to your role. And that can be a real motivating factor, because we all want to be part of something bigger, don't we? This is the thing. So actually that why can be so important. Yeah, I see what you mean, Lisa, about the what gap is harder. But it also, you're absolutely right. It can also help to identify whether it's a conduct or a capability issue. Is this performance at all that's going on? And that links, I think, back to one of the first points that was made on the chat, Alison, in terms of absence and being able to really isolate what the issue here is, and looking at the time that they have been capable of being in role, in terms of being able to manage an objective assessment of performance. What I think your point really does illustrate is, of course, we've been so focused on the change to the 6-month qualifying period to be focusing on things like performance, but things like discrimination, particularly disability discrimination, if there is some persistent or longer term absence where there is an underlying cause, that's always been something that we've need to be concerned about from the get-go. But it's going to become even more of an issue, arguably, if we're looking to terminate sooner, to demonstrate what the real reason of the termination is. Is it performance? Is it sort of absence management being dressed up as performance if we've not properly managed the absence conversations around the underlying causes of those? So it's a really, really interesting point that you make. Yeah, managing the expectations of the manager is key. And, we've got a workforce full of what I would describe as accidental managers who have been great subject matter experts. They've probably demonstrated the great behaviours that they need to demonstrate to kind of fit with how they need to progress. And suddenly they're moved into a manager position without much by way of development for them. They'll be judging their own performance in terms of thinking, actually, I'm good as a subject matter expert. I know I'm not performing as well as a manager, and therefore they'll avoid doing it, which causes some of the delay to creep in, which we know can have a stultifying effect on having good quality conversations across all of these issues. So actually kind of giving them confidence and skills in their right to manage is key. Yeah, I think, Diana, you're a really good point. Understanding generations too. It doesn't, one size absolutely does not fit all. And even if you look at things like the 4Ms and the what, the why, and the how type conversations, understanding how they are prioritizing what they see as a priority is different across the generations. Likewise, how they like to be communicated with. And of course, as managers, they teach the way they like to learn. They'll communicate the way they like to be communicated with. And if there is a big generational difference, then in that situation, there will be a mismatch unless they are given the opportunity to really think about it. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Generational differences make a real difference here. I was reading something the other day that was talking about first line managers and how lonely they feel because they have often become managers during the pandemic, where workforces became hybrid or remote, and they've not necessarily had the opportunity to be developed as managers. They might have had some leadership development, but they haven't had sort of basic line manager, and so they are feeling almost squeezed middle, if you like, in terms of the expectations being placed on them. They don't know how to manage their teams because they've been good subject matter experts, and they're feeling in quite a lonely place, which is not a nice thing to be thinking, that our managers have that feeling, as it were. Tell me about the 4. Oh, lovely. Let me just look at this point, Darren. Thank you. I really like this. Recurring theme: inconsistently poorly timed management. Yeah, absolutely. Having confidence to manage these things early really does make a difference. And this is where, if I go back to the first slide, just whiz back as we're doing it, in terms of that cycle, if you can get our managers to manage in terms of the success cycle from the beginning, it can make such a difference to the overall kind of flow of the conversation starting really early as a result. I've got about 5 minutes left before I hand over to Joe to close us off for the hour. This has gone by so quickly, and I hope I've kept at the right sort of pace. Is there any questions that I haven't handled yet? Let me just have a quick whiz over. Carl, fire away, go for it.
Sure, thank you. I wonder, in a way, is it useful to sort of approach this this whole onboarding and recruitment and feedback probation through an L&D lens? I'll explain. In other words, like if I'm on a course, the expectations are set out at the beginning, from the outset, saying that at the end of this course, you will be able to do this,
Yeah.
you will be able to do that. And that, yes, it puts pressure on managers, but it should put pressure on managers really to, and then you have from the outset, perhaps, you have a reference point to go back to say, like, you're a bit below what we were expecting, in terms of this, or it's not how you're doing this is let's have a conversation about that.
I think it's a really, really good point that you make, and it actually closes us off beautifully. I think somebody once said to me that as humans, we cope with bad news far better than we do with uncertainty. And it really resonated with me. I don't know about anybody else, that actually our new starters in the past, because probably of the 2-year period, have been allowed to drift in some way in terms of expectations around performance, which probably, even with our higher performance, has probably held back some of their performance because of that uncertainty, because it will have been triggering kind of fight or flight type brain. So yeah. Despite all of the challenges that we've had in terms of updating our policies, making decisions and all of those things, if societally we see a shift as a result of this employment law change, which is to say, let's set our new starters up for success a little bit more, then actually, are we going to see an uptick in overall performance? And the fears that we had about, lots of increases in employment tribunal claims, is it actually going to come to fruition? Or is it going to be that actually our managers are setting those expectations, as you describe, Carl, and then having good quality conversations? That's probably a long-term aspiration. We're going to see some bumps in the road to get there inevitably. Whenever we have a service that is free to access, then there's always going to be people that will have a go and bring a claim. But at the end of the day, if we can create a good bedrock in terms of the information that's being shared around the probation, then those unfair dismissals claims won't succeed. They just won't at the end of the day. So yeah, I think the point you make is an excellent one, and I think it brings us beautifully to a conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely. So Joe, I will hand the floor to you then, if I may, just to finish us off and wave everybody on to hopefully lovely afternoons.
No, that's great. Thanks, Vicky. Lots of interesting conversations there. Thanks everyone to contributing. It does make a difference when we get feedback from the people that are attending. So I'll send out some correspondence to everyone that's signed up for the event, and I'll put a post on LinkedIn. So if you'd like a copy of Vicky's slides or the recording, then please put a comment against the LinkedIn post. My next event is in 2 days' time on Thursday, and it's called Staying in the Zone, Tools for Resilience and Performance. So a link to sign up will be included in the email. If anyone's recruiting, we've also got FD Recruit, Exec Recruit and Charity Recruit within the group. But otherwise, I'd just like to say a massive thanks to you, Vicky, for your time and effort in putting the event together, and for everyone for tuning in. I hope you found it worthwhile. Thank you.